We have so much fun looking for interesting things to bring to our collectors. And why do we do What's Sold videos? Because we want you to know, if you're a collector, how cool these things are. And if you're a reseller, well, especially this month, we sold 20 items that you might walk right by in an estate sale and not even look at. But you should, and we're going to show you why right now. Our theme this month was vintage books and paper ephemera. And here is the first item that sold. This is a wonderful 1930s serial premium. You would mail in box tops, and there was a series of 4 of these. This is number 3. The Storybook of Games by Kellogg's. And it would have various fairy tales in it. And there would be advertising, of course, for Kellogg's. You can see the wonderful little elves there, because this is before Snap, Crackle, and Pop. And it tells you how to play the game. There were little markers. The markers are gone, but everything else is intact. And this one is the story of the Glass Hill. And it's a fairy tale I wasn't familiar with, but there's a beautiful princess at the top of the Glass Hill. And everybody tries to get up there to win her hand, and they're not able to do it. And 2 brothers make the attempt. And their little brother, who they don't give very much attention and don't think much of, manages to get hold of a golden stallion, and he rides to the top of the Glass Hill and takes her hand. So it's one of those things. I think they figured in that era, lots of people had multiple siblings. And if you were the little one in the family, well, you needed a story like that to tell you that you were just as good as your older brothers and sisters. It was very cute. It went for $19.99 to one of our members. This one also went to a member on a Buy It Now. Members on the level 2 and 3 level are the ones who help support this extra content and let us do these deep dives and these extra videos. And so we let them have early access. And someone saw this and just had to have it. I almost kept this for my collection. It's just great. It's from the Prohibition era. It's not pre-Prohibition. It is the middle of Prohibition, because it is showing a bourbon distillery just over the border in Tecate, Mexico. And that is what's so unusual about this, is that this is advertising to Americans to come and party where it's legal. And this one went for $19.99 on one bid as well. This set sold for $45. I found out after the fact a very interesting thing about these. These are little silks, and these were given to the Chinese children, and they were to make pen pals around the world, and then include one of these in each of their letters. It was a way for the Chinese government to spread propaganda. Very interesting thing from the 1970s. This set went for $45, also on a Buy It Now. And this set, I was very pleased. Greta Garbo, such a beauty, such a classic, so golden age Hollywood. And to see somebody still appreciate her. These were a set of 10 photographs from her various movies that were done as something for the Museum of Modern Art around 1980. And they were done as a fundraiser. And this set went for $29.99, also on a Buy It Now. If you notice a theme here, it's that all of these things might be things in a pile, in a file cabinet, in a drawer, sitting there at an estate sale, being overlooked. A lot of times, the people who conduct estate sales, they never get to the bottom of the stacks of paper, especially if somebody has a lot of it. And so there are wonderful things hidden in houses all over the place like this. This set was also very cute and went for $9.99 on a Buy It Now. There is the prospective husband. He's a bit of a brute. He's not necessarily so couth. These are comic cards. I'm sure they were part of a larger series, because they have stock numbers in the lower corner. And there is the bride-to-be, and she's not having any children because she's piling up way too many bills for them to afford to have a family. This is a beautiful thing, and another example of something you can get inexpensively at estate sales that collectors really love. I love maps. I mainly collect ones from the 1920s, but this beautiful Richfield map from the 1930s shows all the way down the West Coast with beautiful graphics and radio logs telling you all the stations. It shows the full service, which that's long in the past. Here is an elevation map because back then, not every car could make it over some of these mountains. And there is your map. It's just a wonderful and very attractive piece. It just makes me want to travel the mountains of the West. And it attracted 7 bids and sold for $21.50. This is the sort of thing that you might see for $1 or $2 in a pile at an estate sale. So part of the reason we do these What Sold sales is because it's fun to share what collectors are inspired to buy, but also because resellers can learn something from this. This was a cute piece too. This went for $15.50. It took 6 bids to get there, so there was definitely interest in this. This is from about 1940. It's a talking card, and it has a certain way that it works that seems very complicated to me. But it was a get well card in the original cellophane. Again, this is the sort of thing you might see in a stack of paper at an estate sale for 50 cents. And it sold for $15.50. So it's not that this stuff is hugely valuable individually, but the profit margins on these can be really, really good. And they're fun. They're graphically interesting. It's something as a collector I really like because you can collect a lot of it and it doesn't take a lot of space. These are the 3 Graces, the logo from the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition of 1909. This was held in Seattle. It was the first of the 2 World's Fairs held there. And this postcard is fairly plain except for that wonderful logo. And that's why it was of interest to a collector. It went for $4.99. Again, we see stacks of postcards. You see in the upper corner there 10 cents. That's probably what it cost somebody at one time. Now we get into some of our books. Children's books, when you get back before about 1950, are pretty sure sellers. And this was a 1950s era print of a 1930s era book by Miriam Clark Potter called No, No, Mrs. Goose. Now, the condition on this one was a little bit rough. And you can see it was a library discard. They've scribbled in it. They took the paper with the checkout roster out of it. It's got some marks on the back. So it's not perfect. But because it's old and because it was a good title, it still sold for $10. This is another example. This is a 1950s pulp paperback. Pulp fiction that cost a dime or a quarter back in the time is very collectible now. This one has a map back, and that's one of the things that's really appealing because you can see all the sites that are listed in this particular mystery. And this one took place in Washington, D.C. That makes it fun. It was not in perfect condition. You can see there's a split on the spine there and a crease on the front cover. But the front cover graphics are so good and so compelling. And that's what was selling people these back in the 50s, and that's what's selling them now. And that's why it did get a bid and sold for $9.99. Again, you might see things like this at an estate sale or a thrift store for a couple of dollars. Now we get into some serious money for some serious murder mysteries. These are from the 1940s. Manning Long was a pretty good author, considered very highly in her time, and considered very highly by collectors now. This one got 7 bids and went for $30.98. But this is the sort of thing you might see somebody pass by, just sitting on a bookshelf in an old house, because they don't really know to look for these. So it's worth taking time, learning who some of these people are, at least knowing the names and being able to pick accordingly. Now, one of the reasons this one was considered a good book was it was a first edition. You notice in the upper corner there, this one was actually at a bookstore at one time for $15 about 20 years ago. And I know that because it came from my mother's collection. She was willing to pay that then. Time and inflation, $30 is about right today, and that's what it got. This went really inexpensively. I think somebody got a really good deal on this. This is an actual signature from Colin Bryant. He was one of the stars of the LA Rams when they went to the Super Bowl the first time in 1979. There's the team picture, and there's the gentleman who got the signature meeting Colin Bryant. A couple of months ago, I sold the hanky from this season, just the linen, for $50. So it really depends who sees things. And when you're doing a 10-day auction, you never know who's going to notice things and who isn't. If the people who had seen the linen had seen this piece, well, I probably would have gotten a bigger price for it. But you know what? I'm happy with what it went for. And it went to somebody who really, really is enthused about it and is a Rams fan. So it went to a good home, and it'll be preserved for years. That's the other thing that really pleases me with paper ephemera, is if you can keep it from going in a landfill and being recycled, then these things exist for future generations to enjoy. Our featured mystery author this month was the sister team of Constance and Gwyneth Little. Very interesting women. They were born in Australia. Their father was something of a vagabond. He took them to England. They lived in Canada. They lived in other countries. They eventually settled in the U.S., and they both married gentlemen from New Jersey and ended up living in the same town. And because of that, they were able to collaborate on mystery writing. And they were the only sister duo doing it at the time during the golden age of murder mysteries in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And we had 4 of their titles. This one is The Black Thumb. The Littles definitely have notoriety. This is a name worth remembering. If you're a collector and you like these kind of mysteries, or if you're a reseller and you like buying things that are going to sell for good money, the Littles are definitely authors worth seeking. This went for $89.88, and it went on 6 bids, so there was definitely real interest. You can see that at one time it had sold for $35, and again, that was probably 20 years ago. So if you take into account inflation and the fact that there's a lot fewer of these copies available today than there were then, well, that seems like a reasonable price. Now, this shows how a difference in condition can make a big difference in value. This is the other Mrs. Goose book that we were selling this month, and this one went for $44.53. And that's because the condition on this was really good. And the illustrations, which were done by the author and her husband, are also really good. Here's the inside flap. You'll notice this is much cleaner and in better condition than the other Mrs. Goose. And on the back here, the only real blemishes were somebody taped the dust jacket on with the old cellophane tape that would turn yellow. A very cute book. Miriam and Zenas Potter did all of the illustrations, and she did all of the writing. There's an entire wing of the University of Minnesota dedicated to children's books in their library, and it is named after her because she was an alum. This is another good author in the mystery realm worth looking for. Margaret Scherf is a big seller. A strange name, but she sells well. She had 3 different characters that she wrote for in her mysteries. This one is another one featuring the Reverend Martin Buell, and they always seem to have to do with food. It's interesting to me how it was mostly women writing these cozy mysteries, and most of these women had a theme. The Littles, everything was the black something. With Margaret Scherf, with the Reverend Martin Buell, there was always food involved. So this is the Curious Custard Pie. Part of the reason this is really interesting is that Vera Bach, the illustrator, and you can see her name on the lower right of the illustration on the cover of the dust jacket, she turned out to be an artist in her own right. She escaped the Bolshevik Revolution, came to America, and made her way as an artist, and was very successful. Dust jackets were a lot of what sold the books when they were new, and they are important to the value now. So if you could find a book with a dust jacket, that really does make a big difference. You see natural yellowing because they didn't use very expensive paper, especially in the war years, and so this is considered normal aging. Mignon Eberhard was a very successful writer as well, and this is While the Patient Slept. Mignon Eberhard's first book won her a $5,000 award and was put out the year before, and this was the follow-up, and it was greatly anticipated. And this one did very well, set almost $70 on 13 bids. Plenty of shivers, it says. And you see that, yes, somebody did write their name inside of it. It would be worth more if they didn't, but we're going to show you one book where that is not true. And that is this one, because the person who wrote the name in it is actually Gwyneth Little. This is a signed copy. This did the best of all the books that we put out over 3 months of doing mystery sales. This one gained a ton of attention because of the signature. The signature is really neat too. To Ellen Nair, still don't remember who done it. It's funny to think that the author doesn't remember what happened in her own book, but she was collaborating with her sister. It may be that the sister wrote the whodunit part. It also may be that she just didn't want to tip her hand. So The Black Piano is just a really, really cool book. And it was sold at a premium before at a bookstore for $35. Now we understand how truly scarce author signatures are, particularly the littles. And so that made this book just really soar. 24 bids, $254.56. I always wonder how we end up with odd cents on bids on eBay. But the big lesson here is, if you're looking at old books, if you're a collector, you can find sleepers. And if you are a reseller, it pays to open the pages in the front and see if you might have an autographed copy. The Black Curl was a later book by the Littles, and by this time the mysteries were starting to go out of fashion, and this one is not as highly valued as the others, but it did sell for $20.49 on 2 bids. Whereas this one, The Black Eye, came out right smack dab in the middle of World War II, and that was when these really came to their peak. I think people were looking for escape. It seems funny to think people are reading murder mysteries to escape, but compared to the horrors of actual war, a nice little murder that you know is going to be solved and resolved in 150 pages is much more comforting and kind of fun. The way these are written is just really so of the era, and they have a certain syntax, the way they speak, the way the characters speak. You know, it's very Joe Friday from Dragnet. So we sold 19 out of 21 listings. We had an extra listing this month. And the 2 items that did not sell, the first one is this. It's the manual for Schwinn bicycles. This is going to take somebody who has one of these bicycles finding it. And when they do, I think the $4.99 price we were asking is certainly not too much. The swag in the middle, I think, is just really fun. I'd love to have that beach towel. But again, when you're doing eBay auctions, you only have 10 days. And if you don't hit that right person, well, then you have to try again. Or you leave it on in a store at a fixed price, which is what we will do now. And the last one, and I have to admit this might have been me not being really ready to separate from this. It's Steve Allen. This is a very scarce handbill. This is before The Tonight Show was a thing. It was when he was doing the equivalent show in New York, before it was syndicated, before it was broadcast outside New York, and my mother went to see it. And they gave them these cards afterwards so that you could send it to somebody and say, hey, you could see me in the audience on this show. And it was a way to get people aware of the show when it was first coming out in 1953. I think that maybe Steve Allen is so far back in a lot of people's memories that we just didn't find somebody who really understood and appreciated him. But he did work into the late 80s, early 90s, and he is somebody that people know. So I think maybe this was just meant to stay with me. So that's our wrap-up of how things went this month on eBay. It is so much fun sharing this with you. Thank you for watching, and we are going to have 20 very different items in our next listing, but we'll have a book and maybe a little paper in there too, because these are fun categories that are really interesting to a lot of collectors and very cross-collectible and very fun for resellers to pick up. So in the meantime, whether you're a collector or a reseller, happy hunting and bye for now.
If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.